At our daughter's college graduation, my husband of 23 years beamed with pride, his arm wrapped around a woman who wasn't me. "I'd like you to meet Lucy," he announced to our stunned family. "We've been in love for 2 years." The crowd fell silent as I stepped forward with my attorney. "Perfect timing, Denver," I said, handing him an envelope. "These divorce papers document your company's fraud, and that business trip last month with Lucy was paid for with our daughter's tuition money. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." For 23 years, I played the part of the devoted wife who was too busy with household management to understand my husband's business dealings. But Denver never realized that while I managed our home with precision, I was also meticulously documenting his increasingly suspicious financial activities. When he began transferring large sums to offshore accounts, I didn't confront him, I investigated. When he started taking frequent business trips with his young assistant, I didn't cause a scene, I gathered evidence. The moment I discovered he had drained our daughter Anya's college fund to finance his affair was the moment I stopped being the accommodating wife he had taken for granted. I had spent over 2 decades being underestimated by a man who thought I was too preoccupied with family matters to notice his deceptions. But Denver failed to recognize that the skills that made me an excellent household manager, attention to detail, systematic organization, and patient persistence, made me equally adept at building a case against him. As I watched Denver's face transition from smug confidence to shock at our daughter's graduation ceremony, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The carefully constructed facade he had maintained began crumbling before our eyes. The successful businessman, the devoted father, the respected community leader, all dissolving in the face of undeniable evidence of his betrayal on multiple fronts. In that moment, standing on the manicured lawn of Westfield University's Central Quad, surrounded by families celebrating academic achievement, I finally reclaimed the power I had quietly surrendered over years of marriage. The envelope I handed him contained not just divorce papers, but documented proof of financial fraud that would interest the IRS, evidence of misappropriated company funds that would concern his business partners, and records of how he had systematically emptied accounts earmarked for our children's future. Lucy, barely older than our daughter Anya, looked confused as Denver's confident smile disappeared. His business partner Colton, who had been standing nearby with his family, instinctively stepped back, creating physical distance between himself and Denver as he processed what was happening. Anya, still in her graduation gown, moved closer. To me, her initial shock giving way to understanding as pieces of her father's increasingly absent parenting suddenly made sense. "Esther, this is hardly the time or place," Denver hissed, trying to maintain control of the situation, his fingers gripping the envelope so tightly the knuckles whitened. "This is a misunderstanding that we can discuss privately." "I disagree," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "I've kept your secrets private for too long, Denver. You chose this moment to introduce your mistress to our family on what should have been Anya's day. You set the stage. I'm simply ensuring the performance is authentic." My lawyer, Judy Blackwell, stepped forward with professional composure. "Mr. Reynolds, I suggest you review those documents promptly. The financial disclosures are particularly time-sensitive." She handed an identical envelope to Colton. "Mr. Howard, as CFO of Reynolds Enterprises, you may want to review these findings as well. Your signature appears on several concerning transactions." The calculated public confrontation wasn't born from a desire for revenge or humiliation, though Denver would never understand that. It came from an 18-month journey of discovery, not just of his deceptions, but of my own quiet strength and resilience. What began as suspicion had evolved into methodical investigation, and finally into strategic action. For nearly 2 years, I had maintained 2 distinct lives. The outwardly supportive wife, who managed the household with practiced efficiency, and the meticulous investigator who documented every inconsistency, every unexplained absence, and every financial anomaly. I had created detailed spreadsheets tracking the household finances Denver thought I was too mathematically challenged to understand. I had recorded conversations he held in our home office while I quietly folded laundry nearby, dismissed as background domestic activity not worth his concern. "Don't worry about Esther overhearing," he'd say to colleagues on the phone. "She's busy planning Anya's graduation reception. She couldn't tell a tax shelter from a garden shed." Each dismissive comment had strengthened my resolve, each underestimation adding another piece to the case I was building. The graduation ceremony crowd had begun to disperse, breaking into small clusters of uncomfortable conversation. Denver's mother approached, her expression a complex mixture of confusion and dawning. "Recognition, what's happening?" she asked, looking between Denver and me, then at Lucy, who had stepped slightly away from Denver, suddenly aware of her visibility in this family drama. "After 23 years, I explained gently, I've decided to end our marriage. The details are complicated, but they involve Denver's relationship with Lucy and some concerning financial decisions that have affected Anya's education fund." Our son Arlo, a sophomore at the same university, had pushed through the crowd to stand protectively beside his sister. Unlike Anya, Arlo had witnessed more of his father's late-night calls, had questioned the frequent business trips, had noticed the growing distance between his parents. His expression now was not of shock but of grim confirmation. "You promised you'd fix things," he said to his father, his voice low and controlled. "You said those late nights were about securing our future." Denver turned on me, anger replacing his initial shock. "You've turned my children against me? For what? Because I found happiness outside our stale marriage? Because I made investment decisions you couldn't possibly understand?" "No, Denver," I replied, maintaining my composure. "Your choices turned your children against you. I simply stopped hiding those choices from them. And as for those investment decisions, the IRS has a different term for deliberately mislabeling personal expenses as business deductions and hiding assets in undisclosed accounts." Judy stepped forward again, her presence a professional buffer against Denver's growing agitation. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion after you've reviewed the documentation, Mr. Reynolds. My client has been more than thorough in her preparation." The years of patience, of careful observation, of systematic documentation had culminated in this moment, not just of confrontation, but of liberation. For too long, I had allowed Denver's perception of me to define my identity. The mathematically challenged homemaker, the socially naive wife, the financially dependent partner too busy with domestic matters to understand real business. As graduates, and their families continued celebrating around us, our small drama playing out in a corner of the quad, I felt an unexpected lightness. The burden of maintaining Denver's illusions, of protecting our children from the truth of their father's character, of pretending not to notice the increasingly obvious signs of his infidelity, all lifted in that moment of clarity and truth. Denver? Reynolds had brought his mistress to our daughter's graduation, the culmination of an education he had secretly undermined by draining her tuition fund. He had chosen this day, this achievement, this family milestone to finally bring his double life into the open. What he hadn't anticipated was that I had been preparing for this moment for 18 months, that his financially naive wife had been building an airtight case with the help of a corporate attorney, and that the diploma being handed to our daughter wasn't the only significant document being presented that day. Our marriage began like a storybook romance. Denver Reynolds, the ambitious young business graduate with dreams of building his own financial consulting firm, and me, Esther Wilson, the organized and practical elementary school teacher. We met at my cousin's wedding, where Denver charmed everyone with his confidence and easy smile. I was drawn to his drive, his certainty about the future, his clear vision of success. "You balance me," he would say in those early years, his hand warm against mine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I have the big ideas, and you have the patience to make them real. It was a compliment then, an acknowledgement of how my meticulous nature complemented his entrepreneurial spirit. Only years later would I recognize it as the first hint of how he viewed my role in his life, not as an equal partner, but as support staff. The shift was gradual, so subtle I barely noticed it happening. As Denver's business grew from a small consultancy to Reynolds Enterprises with offices in 3 states, the dismissiveness crept in like evening shadows, lengthening so gradually you don't notice the darkness until you're surrounded by it. Esther handles the household, he would tell colleagues at dinner parties, as though domestic management was a quaint hobby rather than the complex operation that kept our family functioning. She makes sure I have a clean shirt and the kids get to soccer practice on time. His tone was affectionate but tinged with something else, a faint note of condescension that made guests smile uncomfortably. When Anya was born, I left teaching to focus on raising our family. Denver's career was demanding, requiring late nights and frequent travel. It makes sense for you to manage things at home, he reasoned. You're so good at it, and I'm building this for all of us. It seemed logical then, a practical division of labor that played to our strengths. By the time Arlo came along 3 years later, the pattern was established. Denver earned the money and made the financial decisions. I raised the children and maintained our increasingly upscale home. At first, Denver would consult me on major financial choices: the purchase of our first house, the decision to expand the business, investments for the children's education. But as his success grew, these consultations became briefings, then passing mentions and finally assumptions that such matters were beyond my interest or comprehension. "Just sign here, honey," he'd say, sliding papers across the kitchen counter while I prepared dinner. "It's just some adjustments to our investments. Nothing you need to worry about." And I would sign, trusting that my husband had our family's best interests at heart. The first real fracture in that trust came 8 years ago, when I discovered Denver had purchased a vacation property in Aspen without telling me. Not consulted. Told me. I found out when a decorator called the house to discuss furnishing options for the new mountain place. "I wanted to surprise you," Denver explained when confronted, his tone suggesting I was being unreasonable for questioning a $1 million purchase. "Besides, you've been so busy with Anya's college applications and Arlo's hockey tournaments. I didn't want to burden you with the details." That night, lying awake beside my sleeping husband, I realized how completely I had allowed myself to be sidelined in our partnership. The property itself wasn't the issue. We could afford it, and I might even have agreed it was a good investment. The problem was that Denver no longer saw me as someone whose opinion mattered on significant decisions. I had become, in his mind, a domestic employee rather than a life partner. Something shifted in me then, a quiet awakening. I began paying closer attention to our finances, asking questions about Denver's business decisions, expressing interest in the family investments. At first, Denver seemed pleased by my curiosity, explaining basic concepts with the patient tone of a teacher working with a particularly slow student. But as my questions became more specific, his responses grew evasive. "This is complicated. Business strategy, Esther," he would say, a edge of irritation creeping into his voice. "I've spent 20 years building this expertise. It's not something I can explain in a 5-minute conversation between your grocery shopping and charity committee meetings." Rather than confront him directly, I began educating myself. I subscribed to business periodicals, took online finance courses, and joined investment discussion groups under a username that didn't reveal my gender or marital status. I learned the vocabulary of Denver's world, the mechanics of the transactions he dismissed as beyond my understanding. And I began to notice discrepancies between what Denver told me about our finances and what the statements I occasionally found actually showed. There were transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, business expenses that seemed excessive or vaguely categorized, a pattern of cash withdrawals that didn't align with our family's spending habits. Nothing definitively suspicious, but enough inconsistencies to nurture the seed of doubt that had been planted with the Aspen property surprise. Then came the changes in Denver himself. The late nights grew more frequent, the business trips longer and more sudden. He became protective of his phone, taking calls in another room or speaking in vague terms when I was nearby. His explanations about business challenges became increasingly abstract, filled with jargon rather than specific details. The Wellington acquisition is facing some structural integration challenges, he would say when I asked why he seemed stressed. We're implementing a phased reconciliation of divergent operational methodologies. Words designed to sound meaningful while conveying nothing. I might have attributed these changes to the natural evolution of a marriage entering its third decade, to the stress of running an expanding business, to the shifting dynamics of a family with nearly grown children. I might have continued in my carefully maintained domestic sphere, trusting that the man I married was still the partner I believed him to be. But then came the receipt. A simple piece of paper that had fallen from Denver's suit jacket when I was gathering clothes for dry cleaning. A hotel bill from the Grand Summit in Park City, dated during a week when Denver had told me he was at a financial conference in Chicago. A bill that included charges for spa services, champagne room service, and 2 theater tickets. Small things, but telling ones. Denver didn't drink champagne. He had no patience for theatrical performances. And he had certainly never mentioned spa treatments as part of his conference activities. I held the hotel receipt in my trembling hands, staring at the evidence of a life I didn't recognize. For a moment, I considered confronting Denver immediately, demanding explanations for the discrepancies between what he had told me and what this paper revealed. But some deeper instinct, perhaps the same methodical patience that had made me an effective teacher and mother, held me back. Instead, I carefully photographed the receipt with my phone, then returned it exactly where I had found it in his jacket pocket. That night, I created a new email account under a name Denver wouldn't recognize, and I sent the photo to myself with a simple subject line: Evidence number 1. I didn't yet know what I was collecting evidence for, but something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of my marriage. That first document became the cornerstone of what would eventually grow into a comprehensive system of observation and record-keeping. I purchased a small notebook with a nondescript cover that I kept hidden in my knitting basket, a place Denver never looked, having long ago dismissed my occasional hobby as another domestic triviality. In it, I began documenting inconsistencies. Dates when Denver claimed to be in one city, but evidence suggested he was elsewhere. Unexplained expenses that appeared on credit card statements. Phone calls that he took in another room or abruptly ended when I entered. At first, my documentation was disorganized, fueled more by hurt and confusion than strategic thinking. But as the weeks passed, patterns began to emerge. Denver's business trips frequently coincided with his executive assistant Lucy's absence from the office. His explanations about financial decisions grew increasingly convoluted when I asked specific questions. Large sums moved between accounts, with vague justifications about tax efficiency or strategic realignment. I began to approach my investigation with the same structured methodology I had once applied to lesson planning. I created categories of information: financial discrepancies, unexplained absences, contradictory statements, changes in behavior. Each observation was dated, described in detail, and cross-referenced with any supporting evidence I could gather. "Don't worry about those transfers," Denver said one evening when I casually inquired about a bank notification that had popped up on my phone. "It's just some restructuring for the Henderson account, business operations that would bore you to tears." I nodded sympathetically while mentally filing the information. That night, after Denver fell asleep, I checked our joint account statements online. The restructuring had moved $50,000 to an account number I didn't recognize. I documented it in my notebook, marking it with a yellow tab to indicate a financial discrepancy requiring further investigation. As my system evolved, so did my approach to gathering information. I became strategic about when and how I asked questions, careful not to appear too interested or knowledgeable. I would intentionally misuse financial terms just enough for Denver to correct me condescendingly, revealing more information in his desire to demonstrate his superior understanding. "So that offshore account is like a tax deduction, right?" I would ask innocently while passing him coffee at breakfast. "Not even close, Esther," he would reply with an indulgent smile. "It's a tax-advantaged investment vehicle that shields certain assets from domestic regulatory oversight. The Cayman structure allows for more flexible deployment of capital without triggering reporting requirements." Each explanation was another piece of the puzzle, another entry in my growing documentation. I recorded his exact words, the date, the context. I began researching what these terms actually meant, what was legal versus what skirted regulatory boundaries. 6 months into my quiet investigation, I made a critical discovery. Denver had left his laptop open on his home office desk while taking a shower. A notification appeared from his executive assistant. "Reservations confirmed for next week. Same. Sweet as last time." My heart pounded as I quickly searched his email, finding a thread of messages with Lucy that went far beyond professional relationship boundaries. Photos, intimate messages, plans for their business trip to San Francisco. Forwarded key emails to my secret account, careful to mark them as unread afterward. Then I returned the computer exactly as I'd found it and walked calmly downstairs to prepare breakfast, a strange numbness replacing the initial shock. That evening, I made my first strategic alliance. I called my old college roommate Judy Blackwell, who had become a successful corporate attorney specializing in financial misconduct cases. We arranged to meet for lunch the following day at a restaurant far from Denver's office or our social circle. "It's been too long," Judy said, embracing me warmly when we met. Her sharp eyes took in my appearance, the carefully applied makeup. That couldn't quite hide my exhaustion, the tension in my shoulders. "What's going on, Esther? You sounded strange on the phone." I had prepared a casual explanation about wanting to reconnect with old friends, but sitting across from Judy, direct, perceptive Judy who had always seen through pretenses, the carefully constructed facade crumbled. "I think Denver is having an affair," I said quietly. "And I think there's something wrong with our finances, something potentially illegal." Judy didn't look surprised or skeptical. She didn't rush to offer platitudes or dismiss my concerns. Instead, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Tell me everything, starting from the beginning. And Esther, bring any documentation you have." That lunch became the first of many meetings disguised as friendly catch-ups. I would arrive with my innocuous knitting bag containing the notebook and printed copies of key evidence. Judy would review what I'd gathered, asking precise questions that helped focus my ongoing investigation. "What you're describing could be several things," she explained during our third meeting. "Tax evasion, misappropriation of company funds, possibly wire fraud if he's misleading investors or partners. But we need more concrete evidence before taking any action." "What kind of evidence?" I asked. "Banking records showing the money trails, communications about intentional financial misconduct, documentation of company funds being used for personal expenses, particularly expenses related to the affair." I nodded, mentally cataloging where I might find such information. "He doesn't think I'm capable of understanding any of it," I said, a hint of bitterness creeping into my voice. "He talks freely about business matters on the phone when I'm in the room. He leaves financial documents on his desk because he assumes I won't read them, or won't comprehend them if I do." A ghost of a smile crossed Judy's face. "Then his underestimation is our greatest advantage. Don't correct it. Continue being exactly who he thinks you are while you document everything. Over the next several months, my collection of evidence grew from a single notebook to a comprehensive digital and physical archive. I set up automatic notifications for all our financial accounts. I photographed documents Denver left in his home office. I recorded conversations when he discussed business on the phone, thinking I was too preoccupied with household tasks to pay attention. The beauty of being underestimated, Judy observed during one of our strategy sessions, is that people reveal themselves completely when they think you're not watching. They perform for peers they respect, but drop the mask around those they don't. The more I discovered, the more I realized that Denver's dismissive attitude toward me, the very thing that had wounded me for years, had become my most powerful investigative tool. His certainty that I couldn't understand real business meant he never suspected I was building a case that would eventually dismantle everything he had built. The major turning point came on an ordinary Tuesday, 11 months into my silent investigation. Anya had called from college, excited about her acceptance into a prestigious study abroad program in Barcelona for her senior year. "It's perfect, Mom. The program aligns exactly with my thesis research, and I'll get to work with Professor Navarro. She's brilliant in comparative education systems." My daughter's voice bubbled with enthusiasm, and I felt a surge of maternal pride. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Have you worked out the finances?" I asked, already mentally calculating how we could adjust our budget to accommodate this opportunity. Her hesitation was barely perceptible. "Dad said it's covered. He told me last week that my education fund has more than enough for the program and living expenses." I maintained my encouraging tone while a cold unease settled in my stomach. "That's great. I'm so proud of you. Send me the program details when you get a chance." After we hung up, I immediately accessed our family's financial accounts, the ones I knew about at least. According to my records, Anya's education fund should have contained nearly $45,000 for her final year and a half of university. But when I logged in, the balance showed just under $8,000. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the transaction history. 3 large withdrawals had been made in the previous 4 months, totaling almost $37,000. The most recent, $2,500, had been processed just 9 days ago, with the description educational expense transfer. I knew Anya's tuition was paid through the previous semester. The timing of this latest withdrawal aligned perfectly with Denver's business conference in Vail, a 4-day trip that had featured prominently in his text exchanges with Lucy, which I had documented from a glance at his phone. This wasn't just about Denver's infidelity anymore. This wasn't even about his financial mismanagement or potential tax fraud. This was about our daughter's future, money explicitly saved for her education, now apparently funding his affair with a woman barely older than Anya herself. Something fundamental shifted inside me in that moment. The methodical documentation that had begun as a way to make sense of my unraveling marriage transformed into something more purposeful, a weapon being sharpened with precision and care. The hurt and confusion that had driven my early investigation crystallized into a cold, clear resolve. I called Judy immediately. "I need to see you today. It's urgent." 3 hours later, we sat in a private consultation room at her law firm's offices, the evidence of Denver's financial betrayal spread across the table between us. "He's draining Anya's college fund," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Over $37,000 in the past 4 months. The most recent withdrawal coincides exactly with his trip to Vail with Lucy." Judy examined the account statements, her expression grave. "The account is in both your names?" "Yes, we established it when she was born. It's specifically designated as an education fund." "And did you authorize these withdrawals?" "No. I wasn't consulted or informed." Judy made notes on her legal pad. "This changes things, Esther. Before, we were looking at potential financial improprieties that might be leveraged in divorce proceedings. But using designated education funds for personal expenses particularly expenses related to an extramarital affair, crosses a different line. What line is that? It potentially constitutes misappropriation of jointly held assets. And if he's been categorizing these withdrawals as business expenses on tax filings, which your earlier documentation suggests is his pattern, we're looking at tax fraud as well. I sat back in my chair, the magnitude of Denver's betrayal settling over me like a heavy cloak. He told Anya her study abroad program was covered. He explicitly assured our daughter she had sufficient funds for an educational opportunity that would cost at least $25,000. He lied to her face while simultaneously draining the account that would pay for it. Do you have documentation of that conversation? Anya mentioned it on the phone today. I can ask her to confirm the details via email. Judy nodded. Do that, but phrase it carefully. Just checking in about program costs and what her father promised. We don't want to alarm her unnecessarily at this stage. I sent the email from Judy's office, a casual mother-daughter exchange about exciting study abroad plans. Anya's response came within an hour, confirming that Denver had assured her the education fund would cover all program costs plus living expenses. What happens next? I asked as Judy read through Anya's email. That depends on what you want the ultimate outcome to be, she replied, studying me carefully. Are you looking to salvage this marriage, or are you preparing for its end? The question hung in the air between us. Despite everything I had discovered, I hadn't consciously acknowledged that our 23-year marriage was over. I had been so focused on gathering evidence, on understanding what was happening, that I hadn't fully processed where all this was leading. I don't see how our marriage can continue, I said finally, the words feeling strange but true as they left my lips. Not with this level of betrayal, financial and personal. Not with him draining our daughter's future to finance his affair. Judy nodded, neither approving nor disapproving, simply accepting my decision. Then we need to be strategic about timing and approach. With what you've already documented, we have grounds for divorce based on infidelity and financial misconduct. But if we want to ensure you're protected financially, and that Anya's education is secured, we need to continue building our case methodically. How much more evidence do we need? Ideally, we want documentation that explicitly links the education fund withdrawals to expenses related to Lucy. We want clearer evidence of how he's categorizing these expenses for tax purposes. And we want to build a comprehensive picture of any other financial misconduct, hidden accounts, misrepresented assets, questionable business practices. I thought about what Denver had mentioned at breakfast just that morning, a business trip to New York the following month for the Henderson client review. I had already established through previous documentation that Henderson was often code in his communications with Lucy. He's planning another trip with her in June, I said. Based on patterns I've documented, he'll likely make another withdrawal from the education fund to cover expenses. Judy's expression was grim. That gives us a timeline. We continue documentation for the next 6 weeks. You maintain your role as the unsuspecting wife. We track his activities, record his communications, and document any further financial transfers. Then we determine the optimal moment to act. As I left Judy's office that afternoon, I felt a strange sense of clarity. For nearly a year, I had been gathering puzzle pieces without fully acknowledging the picture they were forming. Now the image was unmistakable. My husband of more than 2 decades, the father of my children, had betrayed not just me, but our daughter's future. The careful documentation that had begun as a way to understand what was happening in my marriage had transformed into battle preparations. Every recorded conversation, every photographed document, every tracked financial transaction was now ammunition being stockpiled for a confrontation that would end one chapter of my life and begin another. That night, I prepared Denver's favorite meal and listened attentively as he explained why he needed to extend his New York trip in June by 3 days. The Henderson review is more complex than we initially thought, he said. helping himself to another glass of wine. The team needs me to stay through the weekend to finalize the projections. I nodded sympathetically. Whatever you need to do. I trust your judgment. He smiled, reaching across the table to pat my hand condescendingly. This is why we work. Esther, you've never tried to interfere in my business. You understand your role. I do, I agreed, returning his smile while mentally adding this conversation to my evidence file. I understand exactly what my role has been. With a clear strategy in place, my collaboration with Judy evolved from occasional consultations to regular strategy sessions. We established secure communication protocols, a dedicated email address accessible only from my personal laptop, phone conversations conducted while I was out of the house, and in-person meetings scheduled during times I routinely spent at volunteer commitments or fitness classes. We need a financial expert, Judy advised during one of our meetings at her office. Someone who can analyze the patterns you're documenting and identify potential regulatory violations. I have a forensic accountant I've worked with on similar cases, Howard Myers. He's discreet and thorough. 2 days later, I sat across from Howard in a conference room at Judy's firm, watching as his experienced eyes moved methodically through the financial records I had compiled. Silver-haired and soft-spoken, Howard had the careful demeanor of someone accustomed to uncovering secrets hidden in spreadsheets and bank statements. You've done remarkable preliminary work, he commented, looking up from the documents. Most clients bring in scattered records and vague suspicions. You've already established clear patterns of financial irregularity. Denver doesn't believe I'm capable of understanding finances, I explained. He's never bothered to hide his tracks because he assumes I won't recognize what I'm seeing. Howard nodded, a hint of professional appreciation in his expression. His mistake. From what I can see in these preliminary documents, there are several concerning patterns. The education fund withdrawals are the most straightforward issue. Those accounts were established with a specific designated purpose, and using them for personal expenses is clearly inappropriate. What about the business expenses? I asked. Denver frequently categorizes personal expenditures as business costs. That's where we need more specific documentation, Howard explained. If we can establish that he's systematically misclassifying personal expenses, particularly expenses related to his extramarital affair, as business deductions, that constitutes tax fraud. It's not just a divorce issue, it potentially involves federal tax violations. Over the next few weeks, Howard guided my information gathering with specific targets. I needed to document not just that Denver was spending money on Lucy, but that he was categorizing those expenses as business costs on company records and tax filings. The breakthrough came when Denver asked me to drop off some documents at his office while he was at lunch with clients. His executive assistant, not Lucy, but a middle-aged woman named Margaret, who had been with the company for years, greeted me warmly. He's asked me to leave these in his office, I explained, holding up the folder Denver had forgotten at home. Of course, Mrs. Reynolds, you know the way. I did know the way, having visited the office countless times over the years for holiday parties and client events. What Margaret didn't know was that I had prepared 2 identical folders, one containing the documents Denver had requested, the other empty. In Denver's office, I quickly placed the correct folder on his desk, then began a swift but methodical search of his filing cabinet. Years of organizing our home had taught me to move efficiently through information systems. Within minutes, I located what I was looking for, a file labeled T&E Documentation 2023-24. I used my phone to rapidly photograph every page in the file, expense reports, receipts, reimbursement forms. Most telling were the client entertainment, expenses that aligned perfectly with the dates and locations of Denver's trips with Lucy. The Park City Hotel, the San Francisco restaurants, the Broadway tickets in New York, all categorized as business expenses for Henderson Client Development. I returned the file exactly as I had found it and left Denver's office with a polite smile to Margaret. That evening, I forwarded the photographs to Judy and Howard. Howard's response came the next morning. This is exactly what we needed. Clear documentation of systematic misclassification of personal expenses as business deductions. This constitutes tax fraud. With this new evidence, our strategy sessions took on a more focused urgency. We weren't just preparing for a divorce case, we were documenting potential criminal activity. The timing of our action is crucial, Judy advised. We need to consider not just the legal strategy, but the emotional impact on your family, particularly Anya and Arlo. I thought about my children, about how this revelation would affect them. Anya was focused on her upcoming graduation and the Barcelona program she believed was secure. Arlo was midway through his sophomore year, already dealing with the pressures of college life. Anya's graduation is in 6 weeks, I said. Denver has told me he's bringing a special colleague to attend the ceremony, that it's someone who has contributed to a scholarship fund for the education department. Judy's eyes met mine, understanding immediately. You think he's planning to introduce Lucy to your family at the graduation? I nodded, the pieces falling into place. It would be typical of Denver to use an academic achievement as cover for legitimizing their relationship. He probably thinks it will soften the eventual revelation, introducing her first as a business colleague before acknowledging the affair. That would be consistent with his pattern of using Anya's education as cover for his relationship with Lucy, Howard observed. The symmetry is troubling, using her graduation as the venue to introduce the woman he's been funding with her education. Money. It's also the perfect opportunity, Judy said quietly, watching my reaction. If he's planning to use the graduation to bring Lucy into the open, it gives us a clear timeline and a powerful moment to present our evidence. The three of us exchanged glances, the unspoken strategy taking shape between us. Denver had chosen Anya's graduation as the moment to begin legitimizing his relationship with Lucy. He didn't realize he had also given me the perfect stage for revealing the truth about how that relationship had been funded. With Anya's graduation approaching, our preparation entered its final phase. Howard had completed his analysis of Denver's financial activities, identifying multiple regulatory violations beyond the misuse of the education fund. Judy had drafted the divorce papers, complete with detailed financial disclosures that would be impossible for Denver to dispute. I had organized my documentation into a comprehensive system that could withstand legal scrutiny. Everything was in place for the confrontation at graduation, until an unexpected discovery forced us to reevaluate our entire understanding of Denver's deception. It happened 3 weeks before the ceremony. I was in our home office, searching for a specific tax document Howard had requested. Denver rarely used this room anymore, preferring to work from his downtown office or the study in our Aspen property. The home office had become my domain by default, the place where I managed household finances and volunteer commitments. While looking through the fireproof safe where we kept important documents, I noticed a folder I didn't recognize labeled RE Holdings Private. Inside was a deed to a property in Malibu, California, purchased 18 months earlier for $3.2 million. The owner was listed as Reynolds Horizon LLC, a company name I had never seen in any of our financial discussions or documentation. My hands trembled as I photographed every page in the folder, then carefully returned it exactly as I had found it. That evening, after Denver left for a business dinner, I sent the images to Howard and Judy with an urgent message. Unknown property discovered. Need to discuss immediately. We met the following morning at Howard's office. He had already conducted preliminary research on Reynolds Horizon LLC, his expression grim as he shared his findings. The company was registered in Nevada 2 years ago, he explained, displaying corporate filing documents on his computer screen. The registration lists Denver as the managing member and one other person as a member with 25% equity stake in the company. Who's the other member? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Howard turned the screen toward me. Lucy Winters. The confirmation hit me with unexpected force. It wasn't just an affair. Denver had created a financial partnership with Lucy, purchasing property together through a structure deliberately hidden from me and from their other business associates. The timing is significant, Howard continued. The LLC was formed shortly after Lucy began working as Denver's executive assistant. Based on the banking records you've provided, it appears funds were moved from various accounts, including portions of the children's education funds, through several intermediate accounts before landing in Reynolds Horizon LLC. So he's been systematically diverting family assets to create a separate financial life with Lucy, I said, the full scope of the betrayal becoming clear. It appears so, Howard confirmed, and he's done it in a way specifically designed to hide these assets in the event of divorce proceedings. This type of structuring suggests premeditation, a deliberate attempt to shield assets from marital property division. Judy, who had been taking notes, looked up with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not just professional concern, but personal outrage on my behalf. This changes our approach, she said firmly. What we're looking at goes beyond tax fraud and misappropriation of designated funds. This is deliberate concealment of marital assets with intent to defraud. It's the kind of financial misconduct that judges view particularly harshly in divorce proceedings. How do we prove intent? I asked. The structure itself suggests intent, Howard explained. Creating a separate LLC with his mistress as part owner, funding it with family assets moved through multiple accounts to obscure their origin. These aren't actions taken for legitimate business purposes. This is financial infidelity designed to create a separate life and shield assets. I thought about the timeline Howard had outlined. 2 years. Denver had been planning this parallel life with Lucy for at least 2 years, systematically moving assets, creating legal structures, purchasing property. It wasn't a momentary lapse or a midlife crisis. It was a calculated strategy to build a new life while maintaining the benefits of our marriage and family. There's something else you should consider, Judy said carefully. With evidence of this level of financial misconduct, we have grounds to pursue punitive measures beyond standard divorce settlements. Courts typically aim for equitable distribution of marital assets, but in cases of proven fraud or concealment, they sometimes award additional compensation to the defrauded spouse. I don't want vengeance, I said firmly. I want justice. I want our children's futures secured. I want Denver to face the consequences of his choices. Then we adapt our strategy, Judy replied. We include the Malibu property and Reynolds Horizon LLC in our documentation. We expand the financial disclosures to include all hidden assets. And we proceed with the confrontation at graduation as planned, but with a more comprehensive understanding of what we're dealing with. As I left Howard's office that day, I felt a strange combination of devastation and validation. Every instinct that had led me to begin my investigation had been correct. But the reality was far worse than I had initially suspected. Denver hadn't just betrayed me with an affair or misused family funds for temporary indulgences. He had systematically constructed a parallel life, funded with our family's resources, designed to exist alongside our marriage until he was ready to make his transition. The Malibu property was physical proof of his ultimate intentions. A life, with Lucy, paid for with money meant for our children's education and our family's security. It transformed my understanding of the man I had spent 23 years with, revealing a capacity for calculated deception I hadn't fully grasped until now. With the discovery of the Malibu property and Reynolds Horizon LLC, our preparation took on a new dimension of urgency and precision. Judy, Howard, and I met multiple times in the 2 weeks before Anya's graduation, refining our strategy to address not just the misuse of education funds, but the deliberate concealment of significant marital assets. Everything needs to be documented, in triplicate, Judy advised, 1 copy for immediate presentation, 1 for our records, and 1 secured off-site in case Denver attempts to destroy evidence once confronted. I created a comprehensive portfolio containing all the evidence we had gathered. Bank statements showing the education fund withdrawals, expense reports documenting Denver's misclassification of personal expenditures, corporate records of Reynolds, Horizon LLC, and photographs of the Malibu property deed. Each document was labeled, dated, and organized chronologically to tell the story of Denver's systematic deception. Howard prepared a detailed financial analysis identifying specific regulatory violations and calculating the total amount Denver had diverted from family assets to his parallel life with Lucy, nearly $1.4 million over 2 years, including the education funds. "We need to consider the emotional aspects as well as the legal ones," Judy reminded me as we finalized our approach. "This confrontation will happen at your daughter's graduation. While Denver's choice to bring Lucy to this event justifies our timing, we should be mindful of how this will impact Anya and Arlo." I had been wrestling with this consideration throughout our planning. The last thing I wanted was to overshadow Anya's achievement with family drama. Yet Denver had made the decision to introduce Lucy at this milestone event, apparently unconcerned about how that might affect our daughter. "I've spoken with both Anya and Arlo separately," I told Judy. "Not about the specifics, but I've prepared them that there are serious issues in our marriage that will likely come to a head soon." They both sensed something was wrong long before I confirmed it. In truth, those conversations had been among the most difficult aspects of my preparation. I had maintained the facade of normalcy with Denver, while gradually helping our children understand that significant changes were coming. "Dad's been different for a while now," Arlo had observed during our talk, his perceptiveness reminding me that at 20, he was no longer the child I sometimes still saw him as. "The way he dismisses you, dismisses all of us, really. Like, we're just accessories to his life, not people with our own needs." Anya had been similarly insightful. "I've noticed how he talks to you, Mom. Like you couldn't possibly understand important things. It's the same way some of my professors talk to female students, that condescending tone that makes me want to prove them wrong on principle." Their awareness was both heartbreaking and validating. Denver's dismissive attitude hadn't just affected me, it had shaped how our children experienced him as a father and how they understood relationship dynamics. The revelation that both of my children had recognized the problematic patterns in their father's behavior long before I took action to address them was a painful reminder of how deeply family dysfunction can impact young adults. Beyond the emotional preparation, there were practical logistics to arrange. Judy would attend the graduation ceremony as my guest with the divorce papers and financial documentation secured in her briefcase. Howard would be on standby, ready to join us if needed for the confrontation that would follow the ceremony. I purchased a new outfit for the graduation, not the supportive wife ensemble Denver might expect, but a tailored navy suit that projected confidence and authority. I scheduled an appointment at the salon, not for the subtle highlights Denver preferred, but for a clean, sophisticated cut that felt like reclaiming my appearance for myself rather than for his approval. "The physical transformation is important," my friend Elaine observed when she saw my new look at our coffee meeting the week before graduation. Elaine had been one of the few people I'd confided in about the upcoming confrontation. "You're shedding the skin of the woman Denver thought you were." The night before graduation, I moved methodically through final preparations while Denver worked late, finalizing a presentation. I confirmed arrangements with Judy, reviewed the documentation portfolio one last time, and packed a small overnight bag that I stored in the trunk of my car. Essential items I might need if the confrontation made it impossible to return home immediately. As I moved through these tasks, I was struck by how calm I felt. The anxiety and hurt that had characterized the early months of my investigation had been replaced by a steady resolve. I wasn't acting out of vindictiveness or even anger anymore. This was about truth, accountability, and securing my children's futures. I thought about the woman I had been when I found that first hotel receipt. Confused, hurt, struggling to reconcile the evidence of Denver's betrayal with the marriage I thought we had. That woman seemed distant now, like a character in a story I had once read rather than a version of myself. The systematic documentation that had begun as a way to understand what was happening in my marriage had become a path to reclaiming my agency. Every spreadsheet I created, every conversation I recorded, every financial discrepancy I identified had been a step toward recognizing my own capabilities Denver had dismissed throughout our marriage. As I prepared for bed in the guest room, where I had been sleeping for months under the pretense of not disturbing Denver with my restless sleeping, I reviewed once more what would happen at tomorrow's ceremony. Denver would arrive separately, having told me he needed to pick up a colleague on the way. I would be seated with family in the reserved section. After the ceremony, during the reception, Denver would make his introduction of Lucy to our extended family and friends, and I would be ready with irrefutable evidence of exactly who Lucy was and how their relationship had been financed with our children's education funds. The confrontation I had spent 18 months preparing for was less than 24 hours away. Tomorrow would be the day Denver Reynolds discovered what his simple domestic wife was truly capable of. Westfield University's central quadrangle was transformed for commencement day, with rows of white chairs arranged in precise formation, facing the temporary stage. Flowering dogwoods provided splashes of color against the historic brick buildings, and a gentle May breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass. Under different circumstances, it would have been the perfect setting for a family celebration. I had chosen my outfit with deliberate care, a tailored navy suit that projected confidence and authority, rather than the softer, more feminine styles Denver typically preferred. My newly cut hair framed my face in a way that felt like reclaiming my appearance for myself, rather than conforming to his expectations. The physical transformation mirrored my internal one, no longer the accommodating wife who shaped herself to her husband's preferences, but a woman prepared to stand firmly in her own truth. I arrived early with Judy, her professional demeanor softened for the occasion with a floral dress that wouldn't draw attention. As we walked across the manicured lawn toward the seating area, I felt strangely calm despite the confrontation I knew was coming. 18 months of methodical preparation had brought a certainty that steadied my nerves. "The academic pageantry is quite something," Judy observed as we passed faculty members in colorful regalia assembling for the processional. "Hard to believe I graduated from here 20 years ago." "I didn't realize you were an alumna," I replied, grateful for the momentary distraction from the weight of what was to come. "Political science and pre-law," she confirmed with a small smile. "Though I don't believe I ever had cause to use my education quite like this, attending a client's daughter's graduation with divorce papers and financial fraud documentation. We found our seats in the section reserved for graduates' families, the weight of Judy's briefcase between us a reminder of what would follow the ceremony. Anya had texted earlier, excited and nervous as she prepared with her roommates, unaware of the seismic shift about to occur in her family structure. "Are you ready?" Judy asked quietly as we settled in, her question encompassing far more than our seating arrangements. "I've been ready for months," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. The anxiety I had anticipated feeling today was absent, replaced by a calm certainty that I was taking necessary action. Denver's parents arrived next, his father helping his mother navigate the uneven ground in her dress shoes. At 78, Howard Reynolds Sr. remained imposing, the source of Denver's height and bearing, if not his moral flexibility. "Margaret." Reynolds embraced me warmly, commenting on my new haircut with genuine admiration. "You look wonderful, dear, so professional and confident." I thanked her, wondering how she would react when today's events unfolded. Denver's parents had always been kind to me, if somewhat distant, treating me with the benevolent condescension of people who viewed my background and career choices as charming but inconsequential compared to their son's achievements. "Denver isn't with you?" Margaret asked, glancing around. I thought you'd be arriving together. He's coming separately, I explained, maintaining my composed expression. He mentioned needing to pick up a special guest for the ceremony. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't press further. Howard Sr. merely nodded, his expression suggesting he found Denver's separate arrival unsurprising but not worth commenting on. They took their seats in the row behind us, Howard Sr. immediately engaging in conversation with another grandparent about the university's recent expansion plans. Arlo arrived minutes later, hugging me tightly before nodding formally to his grandparents. At 20, he carried himself with a serious dignity that sometimes made me forget how young he still was. Having driven separately from his off-campus apartment, he took the seat beside me, leaning close to whisper, "Dad's not here yet?" "He's coming separately," I explained. "He said he needed to pick someone up." Something in my tone must have alerted him. Arlo studied my face carefully, then glanced at Judy with dawning comprehension. "Is today the day?" he asked, his voice so low I barely caught the words. I squeezed his hand in silent confirmation. My son straightened his shoulders, his jaw set in a way that reminded me painfully of his father in younger, more idealistic days. "Good," he said simply. The quad continued filling with families in festive attire, the atmosphere one of celebration and accomplishment. Faculty members in their academic regalia began assembling at the side of the seating area, their varied hood colors creating a tapestry of scholarly tradition. The university's brass ensemble played soft background music that occasionally carried away on the spring breeze. I watched the entrance points to the quadrangle with peripheral awareness, not wanting to appear obviously vigilant, but needing to prepare myself for Denver and Lucy's arrival. My hands remained steady as I reviewed the program, but I felt an internal bracing, the same focused calm I used to experience before important presentations during my teaching career. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 11 At 10:45, I saw Denver enter from the east side of the quadrangle, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than a month of Arlo's college expenses. Beside him walked a young woman in a pale blue dress, Lucy in person for the first time in my experience, though I had seen her in countless photographs during my investigation. She was beautiful in the polished way of someone who invests significant resources in their appearance, designer clothes, professional hair, and makeup, that particular glossy quality that comes from expensive skincare regimens. Seeing her in person, what struck me most was how young she looked, perhaps 28 or 29, closer to our children's age than to Denver's 52 years. They paused at the edge of the seating area, Denver's hand resting possessively on the small of her back as he scanned the crowd. When his eyes found our family group, a brief flicker of surprise crossed his features, perhaps at my changed appearance, or at the presence of Judy, whom he would recognize from professional events but wouldn't expect to see at a family celebration. Denver guided Lucy forward, his expression a study in practiced confidence with an undercurrent of tension that only someone who had known him for decades would recognize. He moved with the deliberate assurance of a man who believed he was controlling the narrative, unaware that the story he thought he was telling was about to be completely rewritten. As they approached our section, I felt Arlo tense beside me. Judy shifted slightly, her hand resting casually near her briefcase. Denver's parents straightened in their seats, curiosity evident in their expressions as they observed the young woman accompanying their son. The moment I had spent 18 months preparing for was about to begin. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Lucy," Denver announced as they reached our section, his voice carrying that particular tone of forced casualness that signals anything but. "She's been instrumental in developing our new educational foundation at Reynolds Enterprises." The strategic phrasing wasn't lost on me. By introducing Lucy in connection with an educational foundation at the very moment of our daughter's graduation, Denver was attempting to create a narrative that would make her presence seem appropriate, even laudable. It was calculated to preemptively deflect questions about why his executive assistant was attending a family event. Lucy offered a practiced smile, extending her hand first to Denver's parents. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you, Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds. Denver speaks of you often." I watched Margaret's face carefully as she accepted the handshake. Her social graces were impeccable, the result of decades as the wife of a prominent businessman. But even she couldn't entirely mask the confusion that flickered across her features. There was polite bewilderment in her eyes as she glanced between her son and this unexpected guest at what was supposed to be a family celebration. "How lovely to meet you, dear," Margaret said automatically, the social script taking over where understanding failed. "I wasn't aware Denver was bringing a colleague today." Howard Sr. merely nodded stiffly, his expression guarded. Unlike his wife, he didn't offer any pleasantries, instead fixing his son with a questioning look that Denver pointedly ignored. When Lucy turned to Arlo, my son merely looked at her outstretched hand without taking it, his face impassive. The awkward moment stretched until Lucy withdrew her hand, her composure faltering slightly. Something in Arlo's demeanor suggested he had suspected his father's affair long before I had concrete evidence, a realization that pierced me with a fresh wave of sadness for what our children had observed in silence. "I've heard so much about your programming work," Lucy said to Arlo, attempting to recover from his rebuff. "Denver says you're quite talented." "Interesting," Arlo replied, his voice neutral but cool. "He's never mentioned you at all." Denver shot his son a warning glance, then quickly steered Lucy toward me, clearly hoping to move past the uncomfortable exchange. Lucy's professional smile remained fixed in place, though I could see the slight strain around her eyes as she registered the less-than-warm reception. "And you must be Esther," she said finally, turning to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Denver has told me so much about your excellent work with the Children's Charity Board." The careful selection of details was revealing. Denver had evidently described me to his mistress primarily in terms of my volunteer work, reinforcing his narrative of me as a pleasant but professionally inconsequential wife whose interests were appropriately domestic. It was the same diminished version of me he had presented to colleagues and business associates for years. I met her gaze directly, allowing myself to really look at this woman who had been a shadowy figure in my investigation for so long. Up close, I could see the subtle signs of nervous tension beneath her polished exterior, the slightly too firm grip as she extended her hand, the faint line between her brows, the careful modulation of her voice. "Interesting. He's told me almost nothing about you, Lucy, though I've learned quite a bit on my own." My words hung in the air between us as Lucy's hand remained extended, her carefully crafted expression faltering as she processed the implication. Her eyes darted briefly to Denver, seeking guidance or reassurance. Denver's sharp intake of breath was audible in the sudden silence. His hand moved to Lucy's elbow in a gesture that was both protective and controlling. "Esther, this isn't the time or place for whatever you're implying." His tone carried the familiar note of dismissive authority he had used throughout our marriage whenever I raised a subject he preferred to avoid. It was meant to close the conversation, to remind me of my place in his carefully ordered world. In the past, it might have worked. Today, it merely confirmed that I was making the right decision. "I disagree," I replied calmly, nodding to Judy, who opened her briefcase. "This seems exactly the right time, since you chose our daughter's graduation, to introduce the woman you've been funding with her education money." The words landed with precision, cutting through Denver's carefully constructed narrative in a single stroke. Around us, other families continued their pre-ceremony conversations, oblivious to the quiet drama unfolding in our small circle. But within our group, the impact was immediate and seismic. Lucy's perfectly maintained expression cracked, genuine shock replacing her professional poise. "Denver, what is she talking about?" There was real confusion in her voice, suggesting that whatever story Denver had told her about our family finances, It hadn't included the detail that he was using our daughter's education fund to finance their relationship. This aligned with what I had suspected from my investigation. Denver had been dishonest not just with his family, but with Lucy as well, creating separate fictions tailored to each audience. "Nothing," he said quickly, his hand tightening on Lucy's elbow. "Esther is confused about some financial matters. We can discuss this privately later." The dismissive explanation was classic Denver, reducing legitimate concerns to confusion, positioning himself as the authority who would clarify matters at a more convenient time. But the strategy that had worked for decades in our marriage was proving ineffective in this new context, with Lucy's uncertainty already visible and Judy's presence adding an unmistakably official dimension to the confrontation. "There's no confusion," I said, accepting the folder Judy handed me. "The facts are quite clear. Over the past 2 years, you've withdrawn $37,000 from Anya's education fund. The timing of these withdrawals corresponds precisely with your trips together: the Park City ski weekend, the San Francisco conference, the Broadway shows in New York that you've documented as business development expenses." I opened the folder as I spoke, revealing the first page of meticulously organized bank statements with highlighted withdrawals and corresponding dates. Denver stared at the documentation, his confident demeanor slipping visibly as he recognized the precision of my knowledge. Denver's face flushed, a response I had rarely seen in our marriage. He prided himself on emotional control, particularly in public settings. "This is ridiculous. You're creating drama at our daughter's graduation based on financial transactions you don't understand." "Oh, I understand them perfectly," I countered, turning to the next page in the folder to display additional statements. "Just as I understand why Reynolds Horizon LLC purchased a $3.2 million property in Malibu 18 months ago, with Lucy listed as a 25% owner." Lucy's head snapped up at this, her gaze shifting from the documents to Denver with new intensity. Whatever she had known about their financial arrangements, this public disclosure clearly caught her off guard. The professional polish that had defined her presence was crumbling rapidly, revealing a younger, more vulnerable person beneath the carefully constructed facade. At this, Denver's parents turned to stare at their son. Howard Sr.'s expression hardened into something approaching disgust, while Margaret pressed her hand to her mouth. The social graces that had sustained her through decades of public appearances, finally inadequate to mask her shock. "You used Anya's college fund for this?" "This arrangement?" Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The social veneer that had sustained her through decades of public appearances finally cracking under the weight of this revelation. Denver's composure was visibly deteriorating, his carefully constructed image of successful businessman and family provider unraveling thread by thread. I had rarely seen him thrown off balance this way. Throughout our marriage, he had maintained rigid control over his public persona, regardless of what was happening beneath the surface. "It's not what it sounds like," Denver insisted, though his confident facade was crumbling rapidly. He attempted to regain control of the narrative, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used in business presentations. "These are complex financial reallocations that benefit everyone in the long term. The education funds were temporarily leveraged for strategic investments that will ultimately increase their value." Howard Sr. scoffed audibly, his decades of business experience making him immune to Denver's corporate doublespeak. "Don't insult our intelligence with that nonsense. You used designated education funds for personal purposes. There's nothing complex or strategic about it. It's misappropriation, plain and simple." Lucy had gone pale, taking a small step away from Denver. The physical distance she created seemed to symbolize a larger withdrawal, as though she were reassessing not just her physical position, but her entire relationship with the man beside her. "You said that property was purchased with your investment portfolio proceeds," she said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "You specifically told me it wasn't connected to family funds. You said it was money you had earned independently and had full discretion over. The revelation that Denver had been dishonest with Lucy as well as with his family didn't surprise me. My months of investigation had revealed a pattern of compartmentalized deception. Different stories tailored to different audiences, each carefully crafted to maintain his image and advantage in that particular sphere. Denver looked trapped between his parents' disapproval, Lucy's growing alarm, and the damning evidence in my hands. His eyes darted around the seating area, which was filling rapidly as families arrived for the ceremony. The public setting that he had chosen for introducing Lucy, likely believing it would constrain any potential negative reaction from me, had become a liability now that the confrontation was proceeding despite the surroundings. "We need to discuss this privately," he hissed, reaching for my arm. "Not here. Not today. You're embarrassing yourself and damaging our family." The familiar tactic, attempting to shift blame, to position my actions rather than his as the source of damage, no longer held power over me. 18 months of documentation and preparation had inoculated me against this particular form of manipulation. Judy stepped forward smoothly, her professional presence creating an immediate buffer. "Mr. Reynolds, I suggest you remove your hand from my client. And yes, today is precisely when we'll address this, since you chose today to introduce Ms. Winters to your family." Denver's hand dropped from my arm as though it had been scalded. "Your client? What exactly is happening here?" "This is Judy Blackwell," I said, introducing my attorney to the stunned group. "She's been helping me document the systematic financial misconduct that's been funding your relationship with Lucy." Denver's jaw clenched as he recognized the name. "The corporate attorney from the Hammond fundraiser. You've been planning this for 18 months, I confirmed. About as long as you've been planning your alternative life in Malibu." Nearby families were beginning to notice our tense exchange, curious glances turning our way despite their attempts at discretion. Denver seemed acutely aware of the potential for public embarrassment, his eyes darting nervously to the university trustees and business associates seated several rows away. The professional reputation he had cultivated so carefully was at risk of very public damage. "Denver, is this true?" his father demanded, his authoritative voice carrying despite his attempt to keep the confrontation contained. "You've been using Anya's education money to fund an affair and purchase property with this employee?" The way Howard Sr. emphasized the word employee carried unmistakable disapproval, condensing the complex reality of Denver and Lucy's relationship into its most professionally inappropriate dimension. Denver flinched slightly at his father's framing, perhaps recognizing how thoroughly his carefully constructed narrative was collapsing. "It's not that simple," Denver insisted, his composure fraying visibly. "There have been strategic reallocations of assets that temporarily utilized certain funds." "Stop," Lucy interrupted, her professional polish cracking further. "Just stop with the corporate doublespeak. Did you use family money to fund our relationship or not?" The directness of her question cut through Denver's evasions, forcing the issue into stark clarity. Around us, the prelude music had begun, signaling that the ceremony would commence in 15 minutes. Faculty members were lining up for the processional, their colorful academic regalia providing an incongruously festive backdrop to our family crisis. Denver turned to Lucy, lowering his voice in a transparent attempt to separate this conversation from the one happening with his family. "Lucy, we can discuss the technical details later. This isn't the appropriate venue." "The technical details?" she repeated incredulously. "You told me the Malibu property was purchased with your personal investment returns. You said the LLC was structured to protect your business interests, not to hide assets from your family." Denver's face paled slightly as Lucy's words confirmed what my investigation had already suggested, that he had been dishonest with her about the source of funds for their relationship and property investments. The elaborate fiction he had constructed was crumbling from multiple directions simultaneously. Judy calmly removed another document from her briefcase handing it to Lucy. This is the banking trail showing funds moved from the family accounts, including the children's education funds, through 3 intermediate accounts before being used for the down payment on the Malibu property. As a 25% stakeholder in Reynolds Horizon LLC, you may want to understand your potential liability. The professional precision of Judy's statement landed with visible impact on Lucy, whose financial background would allow her to fully comprehend the implications of what she was being shown. She stared at the document, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror as she processed the paper trail that connected Denver's family funds directly to their shared property. "I'm an accountant, Denver," Lucy said, her voice barely above a whisper but laden with dawning comprehension. "Did you think I wouldn't understand what this means? Did you think I wouldn't care about the source of these funds?" The gradual collapse of Denver's carefully constructed deception was unfolding exactly as I had anticipated during my months of preparation. The evidence was speaking for itself, requiring minimal elaboration from me. Denver was discovering what I had learned through painful experience: that lies, no matter how carefully constructed, cannot withstand the weight of documented truth. Reynolds family? The usher's polite interruption temporarily halted our confrontation. "The ceremony will begin in 5 minutes. We need all families seated, please." The ceremony proceeded with stately academic tradition, speeches about future potential, faculty processions in colorful regalia, the rhythmic calling of names as graduates crossed the stage. Under normal circumstances, I would have been fully present for this milestone in my daughter's life. Instead, my awareness was split between pride in Anya's achievement and acute consciousness of the confrontation paused, but not concluded beside me. We had arranged ourselves in tense silence as the usher directed, Denver attempting to sit beside me until Arlo firmly took that seat, positioning himself as a physical barrier between us. Lucy sat at the far end of our row, visibly distancing herself from Denver, her eyes fixed on the documents Judy had provided rather than on the ceremony unfolding before us. Between them, Denver's parents maintained rigid postures, Margaret occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief in a gesture that could be mistaken for maternal emotion by casual observers, but which I recognized as an attempt to contain her distress. Denver sat rigidly throughout the ceremony, applauding mechanically at appropriate moments but radiating tension visible to anyone who knew him well. His normally commanding presence had diminished, as though the evidence presented in those brief minutes before the ceremony had physically reduced him. Occasionally, he would attempt to catch Lucy's eye across the family group, but she steadfastly avoided his gaze, the documents in her lap apparently more compelling than his attempts at nonverbal communication. The university president spoke eloquently about integrity and perseverance, values that resonated with uncomfortable irony given what had just transpired in our family circle. "The character you've built during your time at Westfield will serve as your foundation in the years ahead," he proclaimed from the podium. "The choices you make, the principles you uphold, these define you far more profoundly than any professional. Success." Beside me, I felt Arlo's slight shift at these words, a nearly imperceptible nod of agreement. My son had demonstrated more integrity in his silent refusal to shake Lucy's hand than his father had shown in years of financial success built on deception. As the ceremony continued, I found my thoughts drifting to Anya, poised on the threshold of her adult life. She sat among her peers in their identical black gowns, unaware of the seismic shift occurring in her family structure. I felt a complex mixture of emotions: grief that this day was being shadowed by her father's betrayal, determination to protect her future despite his actions, and fierce pride in what she had accomplished through her own merits. The dean of the education department took the podium, beginning the presentation of degrees. "The Bachelor of Education candidates represent our university's commitment to nurturing the next generation of minds," he announced. "These graduates have demonstrated not just academic excellence, but the capacity to communicate knowledge and inspire growth in others." Row by row, graduates rose and proceeded toward the stage as their names were called. The audience applauded politely for each student, with occasional enthusiastic cheers from family groups celebrating their graduates' moment of recognition. Despite the tension in our row, I was determined that Anya would have that same support, that whatever was happening between her parents would not diminish this achievement she had worked so hard to reach. When Anya's name was called, Anya Elizabeth Reynolds, Bachelor of Education, summa cum laude, our fractured family rose as one, momentarily united in pride despite the undercurrents of conflict. Denver stood straight-backed, his face composed, into an expression of paternal pride that looked genuine despite everything else. Margaret wiped fresh tears that seemed more authentically joyful. Even Lucy rose, though she remained apart, her applause polite but restrained. Watching my daughter cross the stage with confident steps, accepting her diploma with the grace that had always characterized her, I felt a complex wave of emotions. Pride in the remarkable young woman she had become, gratitude that she remained unaware for these precious moments of the family drama unfolding in the audience, and renewed resolve to ensure that her achievement would not be undermined by her father's betrayal. Anya paused at center stage for the official photograph, her smile radiant as she shook the dean's hand. In that moment, looking at her black graduation gown and the bright future it represented, I was more certain than ever that I had made the right decision in documenting Denver's financial misconduct. The education funds he had diverted weren't abstract accounts. They were the tangible representation of our children's opportunities and potential. In misappropriating those funds, Denver hadn't just betrayed me. He had betrayed the very purpose of parenthood itself. As the ceremony concluded and graduates dispersed to find their families, Denver turned to me with cold determination. His momentary unity in celebrating Anya had evaporated, replaced by the calculating demeanor I had come to recognize through months of observation. "We're not doing this here," he said in a low voice, tension evident in every syllable. "Whatever dramatic scenario you've choreographed needs to wait until we're in private." The familiar authoritative tone might once have intimidated me into compliance, but those days were long past. However, I did agree that Anya deserved to celebrate her achievement without immediately being drawn into the family crisis. Anya deserves to celebrate without this hanging over her, I agreed, surprising him with my apparent concession. "We'll maintain appearances through the reception, but before you leave today, you will acknowledge what you've done and accept the consequences." Denver's momentary relief at my apparent concession hardened into wariness at my final statement. He opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by Anya's arrival, her face glowing with achievement as she navigated through the crowd toward us. "You made it!" she exclaimed, her eyes bright with excitement. "I was afraid I wouldn't be able to find everyone in this crowd." "We wouldn't have missed it for anything," I said, embracing her tightly, momentarily setting aside everything else, to fully celebrate this moment with my daughter. The familiar scent of her shampoo and the strength of her hug momentarily transported me back to simpler times, before documentation folders and divorce papers had become part of our family narrative. "We're so proud of you," Denver added, his voice carrying practiced warmth as he moved in for his own hug. If Anya noticed the tension between us, she gave no indication, accepting his embrace with the same enthusiasm. "Congratulations, genius," Arlo said, lifting his sister in a bear hug that made her laugh despite her attempts at dignified graduate decorum. Their bond had always been strong, but in recent months, as I had begun preparing both of them for potential changes in our family structure, I had noticed a new protective quality in Arlo's relationship with his sister. As Denver's parents offered their own congratulations, I noticed Lucy hanging back awkwardly, clearly uncertain of her role in this family moment that had been irrevocably altered by the revelations before the ceremony. The confidence with which she had arrived on Denver's arm had evaporated, replaced by the discomfort of someone who suddenly recognizes they've been positioned in a false narrative. Chandler's restaurant had been Denver's choice, upscale, with private dining rooms that catered to the university's wealthier families during graduation weekends. As we were escorted to our reserved table, I noted the strategic advantages of the setting. The private room offered both the exclusivity Denver preferred, and now, the containment of what was about to unfold. We arranged ourselves around the elegant table, Denver attempting to position Lucy beside him until his mother pointedly took that seat, leaving Lucy between Howard Sr. and Arlo in a subtle but unmistakable isolation. Judy seated herself beside me, her briefcase placed deliberately on the table rather than discreetly beneath it. Anya, still glowing with post-graduation excitement, sat at the head of the table, blissfully unaware of the charged atmosphere. "A toast," Denver announced as champagne was poured, clearly attempting to establish control over the gathering. "To Anya, whose academic excellence makes us all proud, and whose future is bright with promise." Glasses were raised, though I noticed both Howard Sr. and Arlo barely sipped before setting their flutes down. Lucy's hand trembled slightly as she held her glass, her eyes darting occasionally to the purse where she had placed the financial documents Judy had given her. "Speaking of Anya's future," I said calmly after the toast, "Dr. Navarro mentioned the Barcelona program being covered by your education fund, Anya. That must be a relief." Denver shot me a warning glance, but I continued, my voice steady. "Unfortunately, there's something you need to know. Your education fund has been significantly depleted, not by legitimate educational expenses, but by your father's personal use." "Mom, what are you talking about?" Anya asked, confusion replacing her celebratory mood. "Esther, this isn't the time," Denver interjected sharply. "It is precisely the time," I countered, "since you've promised our daughter that her Barcelona program is funded by money you've already spent." Judy silently opened her briefcase, removing the folder containing the education fund statements and placing it before Anya. "These are the records of withdrawals from your dedicated education account over the past 2 years," she explained professionally. "The balance remaining is approximately $8,000, significantly less than the Barcelona program requires." Anya stared at the documents, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "Dad? Is this true? What happened to my education fund?" Denver's attempt at maintaining composure visibly cracked. "This is being presented without context," he insisted. "These were temporary reallocations for investment opportunities that would ultimately increase the fund's value. Investments like the Malibu property registered to Reynolds Horizon LLC?" Howard Sr. asked, his voice cutting. "With your assistant? Listed as part owner?" Lucy flinched at the description, clearly uncomfortable with being reduced to assistant in this context, yet equally uncomfortable with acknowledging her actual role. "You spent my education money on property with her?" Anya asked, her voice small but increasingly firm as understanding dawned. She turned to Lucy. "Who are you really? Dad introduced you as someone from the Educational Foundation, but that's not it, is it?" The moment hung suspended, the direct question from Denver's daughter leaving no room for evasion. Lucy looked trapped, her eyes darting to Denver, who appeared equally cornered. "Lucy and I have been in a relationship," Denver finally admitted, his tone defensive. "The property investment was a separate business matter." "Funded with my college money," Anya stated. No longer a question, but an accusation. "Not just your education fund," I added quietly. "Arlo's as well. Combined with other family assets, nearly $1.4 million has been diverted to finance your father's relationship with Lucy and their property investments together." The weight of this revelation settled over the table. Anya's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of cold fury. I had rarely seen in my gentle-natured daughter. "So my Barcelona program? The one you promised was covered?" "I'll handle it," Denver said quickly. "I'll make arrangements." "With what money?" Judy asked pointedly. "The accounts we've been monitoring show significant financial distress in Your legitimate business operations. The company is leveraged well beyond sustainable levels to maintain the appearance of success while funding your parallel life with Ms. Winters. This is absurd, Denver said, his voice rising with desperation. You've cobbled together fragments of financial information without understanding the complete picture. My business is thriving. These are strategic debt positions designed to maximize growth opportunities. Is that what you told the IRS? Judy asked calmly, removing another document from her briefcase. Because the records show you've been categorizing personal expenses related to Ms. Winters as business deductions. That's not strategic, it's tax fraud. Lucy paled visibly, her professional composure completely abandoned. Denver, you told me all those expenses were legitimate business meetings. You said everything was properly documented. They were legitimate, Denver insisted. Our relationship developed through professional collaboration. The business aspects are entirely separate. The Broadway tickets, the spa weekends, the private villa in Cabo, I asked, referring to expenses I had meticulously documented. All business development for the Henderson client? There is no Henderson client, is there, Dad? Arlo interjected, his voice tight with controlled anger. It's just the code you've been using in your records to hide your affair. Denver's parents sat in stunned silence, his mother's eyes brimming with tears of humiliation, his father's jaw set in rigid disappointment. The waiter who approached our table with menus quickly retreated, sensing the volatile atmosphere. I want to know exactly how much of my future you spent on her? Anya said, her voice steadier than I expected as she pointed at Lucy. Was Barcelona a lie? Was the promise of graduate school funding also gone? Before Denver could formulate another evasion, Judy placed an additional document before Anya. This is the current state of all education accounts established for you and your brother. As you can see, the graduate school fund has been completely liquidated. The Barcelona program cannot be funded from the remaining balance. Anya studied the statement, then looked up at her father with cold clarity. All those lectures about financial responsibility, all those times you made me justify every expense in my budget, while you were spending my future on, she gestured, at Lucy, unable to find words adequate to express her disgust. Anya, I can explain, Denver began. No, you can't, Anya interrupted with surprising authority. There is no explanation that makes this acceptable. I placed the envelope Judy had given me earlier on the table, sliding it toward Denver. These are divorce papers, including complete financial disclosures based on our documentation of your misappropriation of family assets. They also include a request for full financial restoration of the children's education funds. Denver stared at the envelope without touching it, the comprehensive dismantling of his carefully constructed double life rendering him momentarily speechless. Lucy stood abruptly. I need to leave. I can't be part of this. I didn't know about the education funds, Denver. I didn't know you were lying to your family about our relationship. Her voice cracked slightly. I'm an accountant. Do you understand what association with tax fraud could do to my professional license? Denver reached for her arm. Lucy, wait. She pulled away sharply. Don't contact me again. My attorney will reach out regarding Reynolds Horizon LLC and next steps. With that, she walked out of the private dining room, leaving Denver to face his family alone. The silence that followed her departure was broken by Howard Sr.'s voice, low and cutting. In 50 years of business, I never once misappropriated funds or misrepresented expenses to the IRS. I built a reputation for integrity that you have now damaged beyond repair. Whatever consequences follow from this, you have earned them completely. Denver turned to me, anger and panic warring in his expression. You orchestrated this entire scenario. You deliberately chose our daughter's graduation to humiliate me publicly. No, I corrected him calmly. You chose our daughter's graduation to introduce your mistress to our family. I simply ensured everyone understood exactly who she was and how your relationship has been financed. What happens now? Anya asked, her graduation day joy completely evaporated, replaced by the harsh reality of her father's betrayal. Legally, several processes will begin simultaneously, Judy explained, her professional demeanor offering a steadying structure to the chaos of emotions around the table. The divorce proceedings will address the division of marital assets and restoration of misappropriated funds. There may be separate actions regarding tax liabilities, depending on how the IRS views the financial documentation we've submitted. To them, Denver's head snapped up. You've already contacted the IRS? A whistleblower report was filed last month, I confirmed, meeting his gaze steadily. The evidence of systematic tax fraud was too substantial to ignore. Not addressing it would potentially make me complicit. The color drained from Denver's face as the full implications sank in. Tax fraud investigations carried consequences beyond divorce settlements, potential fines, professional ramifications, even criminal charges in severe cases. You've destroyed everything, he said, his voice hollow. 23 years of marriage, my relationship with Lucy, potentially my business, all because you couldn't accept that I found happiness elsewhere. No, Dad, Arlo interjected before I could respond. You destroyed everything when you decided to steal from your children's future to finance your affair, when you lied to all of us about what you were doing, when you used our family's resources to build a separate life while pretending to support us. Denver seemed genuinely shocked by his son's direct condemnation. Throughout our marriage, Arlo had generally avoided conflict, often deferring to his father's authority even when he disagreed. This forthright accusation represented a fundamental shift in their relationship, another consequence Denver hadn't anticipated. What about Barcelona? Anya asked, returning to her immediate concern. My program starts in 6 weeks. I reached across the table to take her hand. That's already been addressed. When I discovered the depleted state of your education fund, I liquidated some of my personal investments, stocks my grandfather left me that I've maintained separately throughout the marriage. The money has been transferred to a new account in your name only. Your Barcelona program is secure. Relief washed over Anya's face, followed quickly by confusion. You've known about this for how long? Why didn't you tell me sooner? I needed to gather comprehensive evidence before taking action, I explained, and I wanted to protect your final semester from this disruption. You deserve to focus on your studies without worrying about family finances. Howard Sr. stood with sudden decision, his authority commanding the room's attention. Margaret and I will be handling the graduate school funding, he announced, looking at Anya. Your father's actions are his own, but your grandparents stand by their commitment to your education. Denver looked up at his father with a flash of hope that was quickly extinguished by Howard Sr.'s next words. As for you, the older man continued, turning to his son, you will meet with the family attorney tomorrow morning to begin addressing these financial improprieties. Whatever legal consequences follow, you will face them with full disclosure and cooperation. The Reynolds name has stood for integrity in this community for 3 generations. I will not allow your poor judgment to destroy that legacy completely. Without waiting for Denver's response, Howard Sr. helped Margaret to her feet. Anya, congratulations again on your graduation. This situation does not diminish your achievement or our pride in you. He nodded formally to me. Esther, please keep us informed of next steps. Margaret and I will see ourselves out. As his parents departed, Denver sat alone on his side of the table, the physical separation mirroring his newly isolated position. His carefully constructed world had collapsed entirely in the space of an hour. His mistress gone, his parents disgusted, his children contemptuous, his marriage over, and potential legal jeopardy looming. Word spreads quickly in professional circles, especially when those circles are built more on appearance than substance. Within days of the graduation confrontation, The carefully constructed image Denver had maintained among colleagues and business associates began to fracture. The first domino fell when Colton Howard, Denver's CFO and longtime associate, requested an urgent meeting with me and Judy. We met at Judy's office rather than at the house I still shared with Denver, though we now occupied separate bedrooms and maintained minimal contact. I need to understand my potential exposure, Colton explained, his typically confident demeanor replaced by visible anxiety. Several of the financial documents you presented at the graduation lunch contained my signature as CFO, particularly the expense reports categorizing personal expenditures as business costs. Judy maintained professional neutrality. Your signature on fraudulent documentation does create potential liability, Mr. Howard. The extent depends on your knowledge of the misclassifications. I signed what Denver put in front of me, Colton admitted, running a hand through his thinning hair. We've worked together for 15 years. I trusted his representations about client meetings and business development expenses. Trusted or deliberately avoided investigating? I asked, remembering the many dinner parties where Colton had laughed at Denver's jokes about my financial naivety, complicit in the narrative of the simple wife who couldn't understand real business. Colton had the grace to look ashamed. I suspected some of the expenses might be personal rather than business-related, but Denver assured me everything was properly documented. He said you had agreed to certain financial arrangements regarding his business entertainment obligations. I was never consulted, I clarified. And I certainly never agreed to having my children's education funds diverted to finance Denver's relationship with Lucy. The reality of his potential complicity in financial fraud seemed to land fully as Colton slumped slightly in his chair. I've already consulted with separate counsel. They've advised me to cooperate fully with any investigation and to distance myself from Denver's personal financial decisions. Distance yourself? I repeated, unable to keep the edge from my voice. You've been his right hand for 15 years, signing whatever he put in front of you without question, laughing at his dismissive comments about my intelligence. That's not a position you can simply step away from when consequences appear. Judy placed a calming hand on my arm, her professional instincts recognizing both the justification for my anger and the strategic value of Colton's cooperation. Mr. Howard, I recommend you provide us with copies of all financial documentation you have access to regarding Reynolds Enterprises. Full transparency now may help mitigate your potential liability later. After Colton left, promising to deliver the requested documents, Judy turned to me. He won't be the last associate to attempt damage control. Denver's deception has created a ripple effect through his professional network. She was right. Over the next several days, business partners and associates began distancing themselves publicly from Denver. Jeffrey Watts, a major investor in Reynolds Enterprises, issued a statement announcing a pause in capital commitment pending financial review. The Chamber of Commerce quietly removed Denver from the Leadership Council listing on their website. The charity board he had chaired sent a formal letter requesting his resignation in light of recent concerns. Most telling was the sudden absence of invitations to the social events that had previously filled our calendar. The same people who had eagerly accepted Denver's mentorship, laughed at his jokes, and benefited from connections to his perceived success now implemented a collective social quarantine. Emma Richardson, who had organized the hospital fundraiser that Denver had prominently sponsored for years, called me directly. Esther, I wanted you to know that the committee still values your involvement, of course. Your organizational skills have been invaluable, but we thought, given the circumstances, Denver might prefer to step back from his sponsorship role this year. The careful phrasing barely disguised the reality. Denver's reputation was toxic, and organizations were scrambling to distance themselves from potential association with financial impropriety. The business empire he had built, which had always prioritized appearance over substance, was revealing its fragile foundation now that the architect's credibility had crumbled. The legal consequences of Denver's actions materialized with surprising speed. 3 weeks after the graduation confrontation, as I sat at Judy's conference table reviewing property division proposals, her assistant interrupted with news. Federal agents are at Reynolds Enterprises executing a search warrant, she reported, handing Judy a message slip. Howard Myers called to inform you. Judy nodded calmly, but I detected a flicker of surprise even in her practiced professional demeanor. That's sooner than anticipated. The IRS and financial crimes divisions typically build their cases more gradually. What does this mean? I asked, struggling to process this escalation. It means the evidence we provided through the whistleblower report was compelling enough to fast-track their investigation, Judy explained. Search warrants for financial crimes require significant probable cause, documentation indicating systematic fraud rather than isolated discrepancies. My phone buzzed with a text from Arlo. Federal agents at Dad's office. He just called sounding panicked. Should I be worried? I showed the message to Judy, who considered it carefully. Your children should understand that while this investigation focuses on your husband's actions, there may be public attention that affects them peripherally. They've done nothing wrong, but they should be prepared for potential media coverage. I texted Arlo back. We anticipated this possibility. You've done nothing wrong. Call me when you can talk privately. Within hours, the local business journal published an online article with the headline, Federal Agents Search Reynolds Enterprises in Apparent Financial Investigation. By evening, 3 local news stations had picked up the story, their evening broadcasts featuring footage of agents carrying boxes from Denver's office building. Denver called that night, his voice a mixture of fury and desperation I had never heard before. You did this. You contacted the federal authorities. I reported what I discovered, I replied evenly. The decision to investigate was made by the IRS and the Financial Crimes Division based on the evidence. They took everything. Computers, files, client records. They're treating me like a common criminal. The documentation suggests you've been acting like one, I said, surprised by my own directness. Tax fraud, misappropriation of funds, falsification of business records. This will destroy the company, he shouted. 15 years of building this business, and you've dismantled it in a month because of your vindictiveness. I didn't falsify expense reports or drain our children's education funds, I reminded him. Your choices created this situation, not my documentation of them. The following morning, Howard Myers called with an update. The search warrant execution was just the beginning, he explained. Based on my contacts at the Financial Crimes Division, they've frozen several accounts associated with Reynolds, Enterprises, and the Nevada LLC. They're moving quickly because they found evidence of ongoing attempts to transfer assets offshore. Denver has been trying to move more money out of reach? I asked, though I wasn't truly surprised. Apparently, in the 3 weeks since the confrontation, he's attempted to liquidate several company assets and transfer funds to accounts in the Cayman Islands, accounts not previously disclosed in any of the company's financial records. Later, that day, Denver's attorney contacted Judy to request an emergency modification to our temporary financial arrangements. Mr. Reynolds's accounts have been frozen as part of the federal investigation. He requires access to living expenses. Judy's response was measured but firm. We'll need full disclosure of all accounts, domestic and international, before considering any modifications to the current arrangement. Additionally, Mr. Reynolds should be aware that attempts to transfer assets after the commencement of divorce proceedings could be viewed as dissipation of marital property by the court. That evening, as I prepared dinner in what still felt like a strange limbo, living in the family home while divorce proceedings and federal investigations simultaneously unfolded, Anya called from her apartment near campus. Mom, it's all over the finance blogs, she said without preamble. They're saying Dad might face criminal charges. Is that true? I considered how to balance honesty with sensitivity. The investigation is serious, I acknowledged. The evidence suggests activities that could potentially result in criminal charges. Yes. There was a long pause before Anya spoke again. I keep thinking about all those lectures he gave me about integrity and responsibility. How do you live with someone for 23 years and not know who they really are? It was the question I had been asking myself since finding that first hotel receipt 18 months ago. The beginning of a journey that had revealed not just Denver's infidelity, but a pattern of deception that had shaped our entire marriage. 18. Months after the graduation confrontation, I stood in the sun-drenched kitchen of my new townhouse, preparing for Anya's return from Barcelona. The space was smaller than our family home, which had been sold as part of the divorce settlement to repay the children's education funds, but it was entirely mine, decorated according to my preferences rather than Denver's rigid ideas about appropriate executive home styling. My phone chimed with a calendar notification. Financial Literacy Workshop, Community College, 2 p.m. After finalizing the lunch preparations for Anya's homecoming, I gathered the materials for my afternoon class, reflecting on how much had changed since that first hotel receipt had set me on this path of discovery. The divorce had been finalized 9 months ago, with terms heavily influenced by Denver's legal troubles. His attempts to hide assets had backfired spectacularly once the federal investigation revealed the full extent of his financial misconduct. The judge had ordered complete restoration of the children's education funds as a priority claim before any other asset division, citing Denver's egregious breach of fiduciary duty to his family. The criminal case was still proceeding, with Denver having accepted a plea agreement on tax fraud charges to avoid more serious penalties for financial crimes. The terms included significant fines, 5 years of probation, and community service. Reynolds Enterprises had been dissolved, its legitimate assets sold to satisfy creditors and tax obligations. Denver now worked as a consultant for a former colleague's smaller firm, a significant step down from his previous position, but the only option available given his damaged reputation and legal restrictions. We had minimal contact, communicating only through attorneys when necessary regarding the final execution of divorce terms. What had surprised me most in the aftermath was not the professional and legal consequences Denver faced. Those had been predictable given the evidence, but my own transformation. The skills I had developed during my investigation had led me to an unexpected new chapter. It began with a casual conversation with Dr. Navarro at a university function 6 months after the divorce filing. "Your understanding of financial documentation is impressive," she had commented after I explained how I had secured Anya's Barcelona funding, despite the depleted education account. "Have you considered sharing these skills more broadly?" That conversation had led to an invitation to develop a financial literacy workshop for the university's education majors, focusing on practical money management and documentation skills. The workshop had been so successful that the local community college had asked me to adapt it for their adult education program. "The irony is extraordinary," Judy had observed when I told her about this new direction. "Denver's dismissal of your financial capabilities created the perfect cover for your investigation, and now you're teaching others the skills he believed you lacked." My financial situation had stabilized, partly through the divorce settlement and partly through my new work. The expert documentation skills I had developed to expose Denver's betrayal had proven valuable in unexpected ways, leading to consulting, opportunities with local nonprofits needing help organizing their financial records. The doorbell rang, interrupting my reflections. I opened it to find Anya standing there, tanned from her year in Barcelona, her expression more confident and self-assured than ever. "Mom!" she exclaimed, dropping her luggage to embrace me. "The apartment looks amazing." As we settled in the kitchen with lunch, Anya shared stories of her experiences abroad, the research she had conducted, the perspectives she had gained, the confidence she had developed navigating a foreign education system. "I've been accepted to 3 graduate programs," she announced proudly. With Grandpa and Grandma's funding secure, I can choose based on the program quality rather than cost constraints. I'm so proud of you, I said, meaning it completely. You've handled everything with remarkable resilience. Anya reached across the table to squeeze my hand. I learned that from you, Mom. Watching you transform from the person Dad constantly underestimated into someone who took control of an impossible situation, that's been the most important education of all. As we continued our lunch, I reflected on the long journey from that first shocking discovery to this moment of peaceful new beginnings. The systematic documentation that had begun as a way to understand what was happening in my marriage had ultimately led to understanding myself, my capabilities, my resilience, and my capacity to build a life entirely my own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.